When I was a little girl, I grew up at 48th and Larchwood in West Philadelphia, and the salary index was 100%. The salary index is the index that I use to describe the well-being of a neighborhood. It's the percent of people in a neighborhood who believe that a child can leave their home, go to the nearest place to buy a popsicle, and come home alone safely. It was unthinkable that a child wasn't safe at 48th and Larchwood in West Philadelphia in the 1950s. The salary index was 100%, and the Dow Jones index was probably about 500. Today, it's reversed. The Dow Jones index is very high at about 10,000, and the salary index is at very low in West Philadelphia and very low throughout the United States. And why is that? It's because one of the ways that we finance the growth of multinational corporations and big banks and the rise of the Dow Jones is by selling narcotics to our children. It's one of the most profitable businesses in America. About a year ago, I gave a speech called How the Money Works in Organized Crime to a wonderful group of people in Philadelphia. They have a conference every year. They go off into the woods for about 3 days and talk about how they can help our culture, our world spiritually evolve. So I gave my presentation on how the money works as organized crime, describing what is arguably the biggest, most profitable industry in the United States today. And towards the end, we were discussing the fact that the Department of Justice estimates that the United States is the leader in laundering organized crime profits of about $500 billion to $1 trillion a year. So I asked the audience, what would happen if we stopped being the worldwide leader in laundering $500 billion to $1 trillion a year? And they said, well, you know, if we stopped, our mutual funds would go down in price, the stock market would crash. I said, well, what else would happen? So they said, well, you know, we might have trouble financing the government deficit because, in fact, the people who control 50 years of accumulated profits, that's a lot of capital that we need to finance our deficit. So I said, okay, well, I'll tell you what, let's pretend there's a big red button right up here on the lectern right in front of me. And if you push that button, you can stop all organized crime in America, and you can stop America laundering $500 billion to $1 trillion of organized crime profits every year. Who here will push the button? And out of 100 people, only one person would push the button. And I said, okay, so what you're saying is you want a whole armada of people to sell drugs to your children and grandchildren to keep your mutual funds up and your government checks coming. And they said, yes, that's right. Now, there are many ways to change that. There are many ways to re-engineer our financial system and our resources so that the salary index and the Dow Jones can be friends. So that when we get the salary index to go up by making sure our neighborhoods are safe for children, the real estate can go up in value, the small businesses go up in value. There are many ways to make the salary index and the Dow Jones friends. But before we can do that, before we can have that conversation, we have to face what's happening. We have to face that we are addicted to drug profits, because if we can't face it, God can't fix it.
They're exotic and faraway places known to tourists for coral reefs and sandy beaches, but known to the business world as tax havens with strict bank secrecy and privacy laws, where U.S. companies could pay fewer taxes and help wealthy customers avoid taxes too. And guess who's turned up in a new government report about tax havens? 11 giant recipients of your bailout tax dollars. Together, they've collected more than $227 billion from Citigroup to Morgan Stanley. Even as they benefit from the tax money, they operate hundreds of subsidiaries in places widely known for helping people evade taxes. Although proponents say most business in tax havens is perfectly legal and legitimate, it's estimated that tax havens cost U.S. taxpayers $100 billion a year in lost revenue. The stakes are so high, this tax haven insider was put under witness protection after he exposed hundreds of tax dodgers and testified to Congress about his job.
Help any clients to keep his or her assets out of the reach of the taxman.
One favorite among the bailout companies, the Cayman Islands, where there's no income tax, no corporate tax, no capital gains tax. Goldman Sachs has 15 subsidiaries there, Bank of America 59, Citigroup 90, But Morgan Stanley beats them all with at least 158 subsidiaries in the Cayman Islands, 7 times the number of hotels.
How hard is it for the U.S. government to get at what's going on in some of these tax havens?
It's incredibly hard.
Former congressional tax investigator Dean Zerbe says the Treasury Department should demand that bailed-out banks cough up details of their offshore interests.
Here we are sending taxpayers' monies to you. Tell us, banks, what you're doing to ensure that you are not helping folks avoid taxes coming the other way.
None of the bailout companies we contacted would talk about their subsidiaries and tax havens, except insurance giant AIG, which told us its operations do not exist solely for tax benefit. Whatever the case, the next time you're reminded the U.S. economy is in shambles, remember there are places where business is still booming, where some bailed out companies are getting your tax dollars and maybe helping others pay less.
Without tax havens, without the ability to set up disguised corporations, without the ability of hedge funds to operate offshore, this crisis would have been far less.
Offshore accounts are currently attracting the attention of prosecutors in the Bernie Madoff scandal. Investigators suspect Madoff used tax havens to keep his regulators and his clients in the dark. And like Madoff, many of the biggest financial institutions at the center of the current crisis.
A huge structure that is designed to disguise financial flows and asset accumulations.
Raymond Baker investigates the illegal flows of money around the world. In his book, Capitalism's Achilles Heel, he estimates Western banks and businesses hide some $1 trillion each year in tax havens.
A lot of the bad subprime mortgage paper ended up in tax havens. So the person in Cleveland or Detroit or elsewhere in the United States that is losing their house doesn't need to be aware of the mechanisms that brought about that. But that is reality, that the ability to slice and dice those packages that contain that bad paper and then squirrel it away in non-transparent entities contributed to this problem.
Jack Blum has investigated financial crime for the federal government for more than 30 years. He agrees with Baker that banks hide troubled assets offshore to keep them under the radar of regulators.
If a bank, for example, has done bad lending and they put it in the portfolio of an offshore entity, no one will be able to figure out what that offshore entity is really worth. And it's that kind of transaction that has absolutely disabled the world financial system.
One of the best at hiding money offshore is the same corporation that's received the most bailout money, Citigroup. And their use of tax havens has got them in trouble before. In 2003, Citigroup paid a huge settlement for helping Enron mislead investors by stashing bad investments offshore. And Jack Blum says bad investments hidden in offshore accounts are at the center of Citigroup's own current collapse.
Their balance sheet was showing these huge assets consisting of investments in offshore entities. The problem was the investments were worthless. How do you write that off and not collapse the bank? Well, that's why they came for a bailout.
All of the drug czars since McCaffrey, or since Bill Bennett, who was the first one under these circumstances, they all do the same thing, they all talk the same way, they all give lip service to drug treatment, but when it comes down to it and the rubber meets the road, the only money that is spent is for incarceration.
The reason why we don't hear about the drug czar, and by the way, the drug czar is the son of General Vernon Walters, who was a great CIA hand during Iran-Contra, a great CIA player. John Walters is his name. We don't hear about it now because the drug business is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. The drug money is flowing, people are going to jail, the money's going through Wall Street, people are happy, it's not out of control, and everybody's looking the other way. And that's exactly the way they need it to be because they cannot sustain not only the U.S. economy, but they cannot sustain the U.S. empire, the American empire, without those drug flows.
That is the natural order of things today. That is the atomic and subatomic and galactic structure of things today.
He who controls the space controls the universe.